Welcome back, everyone. It's your Challenger 2 Tank Daddy, Matsimus here today. I appreciate you stopping by. As you know, I have a huge love for this main battle tank. I've worked alongside of it, served with it in the British Army for about 6-7 years, and absolutely loved working with regiments that operated the Challenger 2. And as many of you are probably well aware right now, Challenger 2 is being poised to be sent to Ukraine, being sent by the British Army to support the war there. Now, many of you know also that I cannot talk about the war in Ukraine due to the nature of my job serving as the Canadian Armed Forces reservist. My social media policy does not allow me to talk about the political involvement of the Ukrainian conflict, and my moral standpoint as well is that I don't really focus on any content involving the war because it's just too raw and too intense right now to have any form of content creation, and I don't think it's right. But in this particular matter, I mean, this is really, again, speaking to equipment than it is the actual context of the Challenger 2 going to Ukraine. I could make a number of videos talking about how much, complexity there is to a tank of this kind and other tanks around the world that are being considered being sent to Ukraine. And this isn't news to everyone. This is pretty common knowledge now. We're starting to see NATO armor being sent to Ukraine. But I did come across some interesting articles recently, and the more and more content I see coming out about NATO tanks being sent to Ukraine, once again, there's a lot of misinformation and also a lot of bias. I am inherently very biased. The Challenger 2, it is my favorite main battle tank in the world. Is it the best main battle tank in the world today? I would say no. And again, I think there is a lot of bias from obviously British forces operating the Challenger 2. There's also the Leopard 2 main battle tank that is also getting a lot of press right now due to the nature of that tank also being considered and being sent to Ukraine, which is, again, a whole different story, a whole different ball game. But this is pretty serious stuff. I mean, we're talking about modern day main battle tanks going to war, going to battle against peer-to-peer adversaries, against actual Russian armor. And it's pretty, I would say, scary in all honesty, for a number of reasons, but we're not going to get into that today. I would like to talk more specifically about the Challenger 2 and some of the information that I've seen about it, and one particular article that was actually created by Forces News, which I have a huge respect for. They're a great network. And I've linked their particular video in the description box. If you want to, you can go reference the full video. But there's a interview that was made with the second-in-command, or ex-second-in-command of the Royal Tank Regiment. And once again, absolutely no disrespect to this gentleman. He clearly has a multitude of experience, way of which nothing compares to what I have. I have zero experience in Challenger 2 compared to this gentleman, and I have a huge respect for him. But I do feel that there is a little bit of I would say a little bit of misinformation, maybe some extreme bias in regards to Challenger 2, because, it is a great tank, but I also am understanding, the more and more I read and learn about articles about this situation, the more we're hearing about how all of a sudden the Leopard 2 and the Challenger 2 and the Abrams are the best things in sliced bread and the most amazing combat battle vehicles you'll ever find. And although they are very, very good, there is so much things that just aren't true. I'd like to show you this article. We're going to go through it sort of step by step and some of the comments that were made and really just put my spin to it a little bit, because again, this channel is focusing around the equipment itself, not so much the politics, not so much the intention, but the tank itself does have some limitations and some complexity when it comes to going into a combat scenario like Ukraine that I think in this particular article may have been sugarcoated a little bit. So let's talk about it.
You know the Challenger tank well. What does the Challenger bring to the Ukrainian forces?
Well, Western tanks, and particularly Challenger 2, vastly overmatch Russian tanks.
So let's just take a bit of a pause here. So we obviously have a subject matter expert who knows obviously a ton about Challenger 2. He's operated the second-in-command of the Royal Tank Regiment, 2nd Royal Tank Regiment, the premier tank regiment, obviously, of the British Army. He knows exactly what he's talking about. But his first statement already gets me off on a little bit of a particularly the Challenger 2 being a vastly superior tank to Russian armor. Look, certainly in Russian armor that's been put out into the Ukrainian conflict, T-72, some of the older style T-72s, older style main battle tanks of the Russian armed forces, yes, I would certainly say Challenger 2 is able to counter those tanks. That's what it was designed to do. More modern capabilities like the T-90, T-80s, we're starting to get into a little bit different of a category here. We have to remember that Challenger 2 in its current configuration, as we're looking at it right now in its most raw stage, has no added protection, no add-on armor that you would see, say, in Iraq, that we had, in Basra, things like that, with additional Chobham armor. We got Dorchester, all that good stuff. These Challenger 2s, and I don't know if they're actually going to be sent with additional add-on armor. I'd be highly surprised if they do, due to the nature of being restricted to certain countries, specifically the British. But it does have enough protection to get it by. In terms of it being vastly superior, I side caution there. Again, I'm a little bit more hesitant to the bias towards this interview, because the Challenger 2 is definitely formidable. But what the gentleman's about to mention soon definitely throws a little bit different, of my opinion, to this anyway.
The old Soviet tanks that the Ukrainians have at the moment. The firepower, 120 millimeter, very accurate, very powerful gun, can fire on the move accurately, and probably more importantly, can fire accurately at night. All the things that Russian tanks can't do.
That's just unfortunately not true. Russian tanks can fire at night with the capabilities they have. Not all of them, and they're not super effective at doing so, but they can. And we have to be cautious when we talk about things like this. We create this imagery of the Challenger 2 being, this vastly superior, has, very little competition against the tanks that it will potentially go against. It's not the case. Russian main battle tanks do have the ability to fight at night. Some main battle tanks of Russia also have the ability to fire on the move in a stabilized gyroscopic attack. You can actually put the gun on target, laze and engage. Not some of the older tanks. I would say a lot of the primary force of main battle tanks of Russia are not really that capable of doing so. Not to the standard of what Challenger 2 is. But Challenger 2 is also extremely dated in its technology. We're not talking about the most upgraded, up-to-date Challenger 2 platform. We've already started discussions about the Challenger 3. Challenger 2 is not a next-generation main battle tank. I'm sorry to say it. I love Challenger 2, but it is not this be-all and end-all of main battle tanks. Battle group thermal imaging, the old-school optics that the vehicle has, it does not have really good night and day all-weather optics inside of there for the commander's viewer. It's just older technology, and we know this. That's why Challenger 3 is being upgraded. That's why we see all these different packages being placed, including Black Knight, and all these conceptual packages that Challenger 2 has. So, again, there is some misinformation here. We're talking about, the main battle tank being able to completely override any functionality of a Russian main battle tank due to it being firing at night. It's just not the case, folks.
As far as protection goes, Challenger 2 is very well protected. It would take a number of hits from a T-72 and the crew would survive. Okay,
so again, I'm really not sure where this information's coming from, and why the individual here is saying that a direct hit from a T-72 is going to be completely protected from a Challenger 2. It's, again, just not the case. It's a lot of there's a lot of factors involved in this, okay? If a T-72 is firing head dead straight on full armor to the Challenger 2 at frontal plating, is it going to stop it? Potentially, right? We're still talking about a substantially large gun on the T-72. We do have fin rounds in T-72. We do have AP rounds that can penetrate armor. If there's an upgraded package of armor on Challenger 2, sure. Yeah, more than likely it will be able to sort of defeat the projectile or the rod that's coming towards it. Side or rear engagements from a main battle tank such as T-72 without add-on protection, Challenger 2 will be defeated. I'm sorry to say it, but it will. It's simple physics, okay? I know for a fact that if you're trying to send a bare-bones Challenger 2 against T-72s, you cannot make a statement that the Challenger 2 will have all the crew protected and they'll be able to take, I think he said, several hits. Come on, folks. Come on. Let's be real here. Let's be real. We have to be real. I don't think that's a statement that can be made. And I think selling that to the public, selling that to the people that are not very aware of tanks, saying, we're sending these, I think it's 15 or 14 main battle tanks of Challenger 2s to Ukraine. They almost sound invincible, when it's talked about in this tone. And I don't think that's right. I don't think it's fair to sell that image of, one, the equipment, and those also the crews that are going to be using them. If you are a crew member or you've operated Challenger 2, what's your thoughts on this? I mean, if you were to say, I'm going to war in Challenger 2, and I had a bunch of T-72s coming towards me, would you safely say that in Challenger 2 you would be completely protected from several shots and all of your crew would survive? With zero add-on high-end capability package of armors put on there? I don't know. I really don't. So it's an interesting statement. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm definitely not saying he's wrong. This is purely just my opinion. Again, he is a subject matter expert. He knows way more than I do. But personally, I don't think that's... I don't buy it. I don't buy that at all.
Completely different to the Russian tanks. Very little protection, and we're seeing them destroyed in their thousands.
Now, again, there's some subjectivity here. Yes, I would agree, lots of Russian tanks are being destroyed, but for a multitude of different reasons. When we're talking about Russian tanks being engaged and destroyed, are a majority of them being destroyed by other tank-on-tank peer-to-peer engagements? From the information and the data that I've researched, no, it's actually not from tank-to-tank engagements. Most of the engagements that have taken out tanks have come from anti-tank guided weapon systems, such as Javelin. Of course, we've got NLAW, things like that. That's really what's taking out these tanks, which the T-72 is never designed to be able to withstand attacks from. Like top-down attack munitions, Javelin, dual-purpose, high-explosive anti-tank warheads. There's absolutely no chance. Also, though, T-72 for sure, and other variants of that Russian main battle tank, Soviet block armor, is not able to really defend itself against Fin rounds from a 120mm rifled gun. It's just not going to happen. But again, we're saying things that aren't quite relevant to the same context of the conversation. We're talking right now specifically tank-on-tank engagement. Right? Yes, thousands of Russian tanks are being destroyed, but not purely by tanks.
And mobility. Challenger 2, although 40 miles an hour doesn't sound very fast, for something approaching 70 tons, it's very impressive.
Okay, so look at this Challenger 2 we're looking at right now. I believe this is actually the Bovington Tank Museum demonstrator tank, so you can see it's got its all Barracuda style thermal insulation armor on there and all sorts of add-on packages there. It looks like it has some IED countermeasures on top there. It also has its CWS, a common weapon system, so it's remote controlled machine gun on the top. This is a very upgraded Challenger 2 for sure. You can also see the add-on armor, right? Look at the add-on packages on the side of the turret and the side of the hull. You'll also notice underneath this padding there's probably more of it. So this is a pretty beefed up Challenger 2. Now, I would be very surprised. I'd be shocked, actually, if this form of Challenger 2, this configuration of Challenger 2 is the ones that will be sent to Ukraine. But I do agree with him on this one. Challenger 2's mobility is incredible. I mean, it drives like a god. I mean, Warrior sometimes can struggle to keep up with it, and Warrior is obviously half the weight of this tank. This is a 65 to 75 ton tank. This particular configuration may be even more than that due to the nature of its added protection and added armor on there. But it is fast, it is mobile, it can go just about anywhere. But I was in the REME. I was the one that fixed these things, whether it be the running gear, the power pack, working with the technicians for the vast amount of electronics that are on this vehicle. Things break on it easily, especially if you have a crew that's not very well trained on it, or they don't take care of it. And we have to think about that in the background, right? We're going to hand over a bunch of vehicles that are going to have training on them at a very short, sharp delivery point to the Ukrainians that will not know the full basis of how to look after this tank and drive it and maneuver it with the years of experience that other tank crews that the British Army have. So there's risk there. When we talk about mobility, the worst thing to have is a pillbox, right? Just a turret that goes nowhere, because once you start breaking things on this tank, it's not a quick, easy fix. It's not. I was the guy who fixed him. Power pack replacement is fairly simplistic in its overall scheme of things, but as many people have mentioned across the board, whether it be Challenger 2, Abrams, or Leopard 2s, logistics is going to kill anything that you try and drive with an armored force. If you cannot fuel it, replace it, repair it, and get it where it needs to go, you're done for, right? An armored brigade is only as good as the logistics following it up. And I know the pogues that we talk about, they are the breadwinners that keep these things rolling, right? The tank crews are the killers. and everyone else supporting it keeps it rolling. And I'm biased because I'm Remy, of course, and I'm sure many of you are triggered by me saying that, and I get it. But it's true, right? These things ain't going anywhere if they're not fixed. And that's one of the biggest fear factors of mobility to these things is they can break easily. I've done so many Power Pack repairs on Challenger 2s to know that it's just very volatile. They're an older system. The tank is not modernized in its modularity as it was with some of the newer packages out there of today. It's older tech, the Power Packs, CV12, fantastic engine, so's the transmission for it. But it's old gear, right? And we're trying to, upgrade to Challenger 3, but mobility can be affected very quickly if we don't have the logistics to meet it. So it's critical that's taken into consideration, which I know they're trying to do when they send these tanks.
And you can cover a huge amount of ground. The last time I was in a Challenger 2 as second in command of the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment, I went for over 2,500 miles in my Challenger 2 with absolutely no problems at all.
Okay, and this is the statement that really gets me. Again, no disrespect to this gentleman. Huge respect for him, actually. But I have to disagree with this. Now, I don't think he's lying. I don't think at all. Maybe he got extremely lucky to have a Challenger 2 that goes 2,500 miles with what he, quote, zero issues at all. I'm sorry. I don't buy it. I just don't. I can't pick that up that he's trying to sell. 2,500 miles on a main battle tank is a lot of miles, folks. Now, let's say he's sort of mentioning that in regards to major overhauls. Maybe he's saying, he's never... To have 2,500 miles without power pack change, I don't believe that for a second. I was actually attached to 2RTR. I've worked with them. I know many of the people who have operated with Challenger 2 and 2RTR, and I can probably safely say I've changed just about every power pack of every squadron in 2RTR at some point during my career due to the nature of them just being pushed to the limits, whether in Suffield or in Germany or in the UK. Power packs change quite frequently. They get pushed to the limits. They're getting worked hard. Transmission and engine, they're getting worked hard. 2,500 miles without any issue, quote, is to me a bit baffling. Now, maybe to him, no issue is, catastrophic failure, right? The engine completely grenading itself, the turret drive not working anymore, the gun system's not working, the fire control system's not working. That I can maybe believe a little bit more, the electronic side. But when it comes to mechanical intervention for this tank, if you make 2,500 miles in Challenger 2 without any form of significant repair, I want to see this tank, and I want to see what it's made of, because it's probably made of, I don't know, platinum. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So again, this statement is a little bit misleading. I will be quite concerned for Challenger 2 going to Ukraine, primarily again for that logistics side of things and the ability to repair them. The great thing about the Ukrainians, and from what I've seen, is they are just absolutely incredible being able to fix just about anything. But Challenger 2 isn't like Russian equipment. It doesn't have a plethora of spares out there that you would have on, say, a T-72 or a T-80 that you can cannibalize from other tanks. There are only going to be 15 Challenger 2s out there, or 14, whatever it may be. Therefore, if you can't cannibalize from the other 14 that are out there, you're kind of stuck. And I'm hoping that the British Army is going to send a ton of spares to support that. But, I mean, we used to go through hydrogas suspensions like they were hotcakes for a squadron of tanks. We would go through power packs like crazy, APUs, all sorts of different components, road wheels, etc. Track links, right? This stuff, it adds up real quick. An actual combat environment now. We're not talking about a training exercise where now and then you get to take a rest. These tanks are going to be fighting 24/7, operational all the time. So your spares and your logistics and your repair value goes through the roof. So, Challenger 2, again, is not this invulnerable beast that can keep chugging along forever without any maintenance or overhaul. Or not maintenance, but any sort of repair or overhaul risk. It's there. It's definitely there.
How does it handle the terrain? Because we will, in a couple of months, be likely in a very muddy, sticky situation in terms of the ground.
The state of the ground is, of course, key. At the moment, it's pretty frozen, so no problem for tanks there. Once it starts getting muddy, we have more of a challenge. However, the benefit that a Challenger 2 has over Russian tanks, it has much higher ground clearance, the distance between the hull and the ground. Therefore, it is less likely to get bogged in than Russian tanks.
Okay, I've got to disagree with this again. I understand his theory to this, and it actually makes sense, and it's true. The higher the ground clearance, the better it is going to be able to trundle across in nasty mud conditions. Challenger 2 is very good at going through nasty terrain. When I was operating with Krav, which is the Challenger Repair Armor Recovery Vehicle, which basically follows Challenger 2 through wherever it needs to go, which is actually technically a Challenger 1 chassis and variant, it can go just about anywhere. It's very good at its off-road capabilities. That big old CV12 will keep it chugging along, pushing through the nastiest of mud, and those tracks and the way in which they're configured with those big old road wheels, nice high ground clearance, it will get through the nastiest terrain. But if we just go back to that footage here of this vehicle here chugging on through, look at the depth of the mud that they're churning through. The Challenger 2 is not going to get through that. It will not. It will not get through that. I have seen those plains and those muddy bogs in Suffield and in Salisbury Plain. I've seen them. I've seen Challenger 2s trying to get into it, and they do nothing but go straight to the belly plates. It's just not going to make it. Now, you can't compare apples to oranges here, right? We cannot compare this vehicle that we're seeing right now to the Challenger 2. Completely different mentality and way of which the vehicles are used, and its size, its comparison. But if you were to say, after the winter and when spring comes and it thaws out, the Challenger 2 will be able to take on this terrain, guys, no. No, it will not. This terrain we're looking at here is crumbly, cold terrain. It will go through it all day long. As soon as you get thick mud into this stuff, it creates a suction cup. It's almost like a seal of liquid mud that kind of sucks the belly plate, and you're done. You're done for. Once you get into that depth, there's nothing you can do. The tracks will just start spinning. And it doesn't matter what main battle tank you push into that kind of terrain, it's going to get stuck. Anything beyond 50 tons, it's going to get stuck in that depth of mud. Now, I can't for sure say that's going to be the case, but the nature and experience of me seeing the number of Challenger 2s that have been recovered, I've worked alongside recovery mechanics a lot in the REME, in the British Army, and seeing the kind of terrain that Challenger 2s can and cannot go through. I've seen some of the nastiest terrain the Challenger 2's been in, and what they're pointing at in this particular example, Challenger 2 would not make this through. It's just not going to do it. Look how deep this thing is. It's about a third of the weight of the Challenger 2. And yes, it's nice and wide. It hasn't got as much ground clearance. Yes, it's going to be a little bit more susceptible. But the Challenger 2, I'll tell you right now, in that terrain, it's not going to do well. Yes, his theory again of being how the ground clearance, the height clearance, is definitely going to give value and added effect for cross country navigation and being able to traverse across nasty terrain. But when it gets that thick, sloppy goop, I'm sorry, but Challenger 2 is still going to have the same struggle as any other main battle tank, regardless of if it's a Russian vehicle or not. In terms of its mobility, though, it can do a lot. It's fast, it's mobile, it's able to fire on the move. I've seen it trudge through some really nasty stuff before, including snowy conditions. And it's also able to handle dust very well. It's been, in the past, had its problems with dust in the Iraq conflict, where it was sucking in dust into the inlet packs, and we had to blow them out with compressors every day, and they're still not as good as we'd, of course, like them to be. But when summer comes, and these tanks are trundling through that nasty, powdery sand, almost like talcum powder, baby-type sand, that is also something that can slow these engines down, because it's a big old diesel engine. It needs air to breathe.
The distance between the hull and the ground than Russian tanks.
The Ukrainians originally would have trained on Soviet-era tanks, the kind of tanks that Russia is using. How different is it going to be for them to operate in Challenger?
A lot of their crews are very experienced. There's very little we can teach them about tank warfare itself. When it comes to the tank, Challenger 2 is very easy to use. It's sort of almost PlayStation technology for firing the gun. And when I converted from Challenger 1 to Challenger 2, I did that in less than a day.
So yeah, this is something I would definitely agree with, right? If you know basic tank combat and basic tank warfare, which I don't, I'll be that very clear, I do not, which is why I'm not really speaking too much to it. The Ukrainian crews are going to be able to take their lessons learned, their principles from using Russian-style vehicles, and apply them very quickly to Challenger 2. I mean, to his point, tanks aren't designed to be overly complicated. It is almost like a PlayStation-style controller for the hand grips, the palm switches for the Challenger 2. Very easy to use, very easy to operate. And the systems inside of there, as I mentioned before, they are quite old in their configuration. It's not like we're talking about upgraded M1A2 V3 SAP setups that have the huge amount of electronic capabilities there. And again, I don't know what package they're going to put on these Challenger 2s as they send them out, but they're not going to be overly complex to use. So I agree, the crews should be able to train fairly quick on these vehicles. But again, I do feel that there's risk of crews that can repair these vehicles. It takes a little bit more understanding of how the systems work. It's not like the years of experience that Ukrainian crews may have had of operating Russian-style equipment. Things are changing now. We've got different systems like DASCU, the engine control systems, and the way in which the transmission, the engine communicate with the computer to the tank. Very different. So it's going to be interesting to see how the maintenance crews work on these vehicles in the future, but I think the tank crews will do just fine transferring over.
Although I was commanding the tank and only needed to fire it. When it comes to driving, it will be, again, very simple to do. Won't be any challenge there. And for the gunner, the one thing that will be a challenge is a lot of the Russian tanks only had 3 main crews and have autoloaders. The Challenger 2, you load the gun itself. But again, this is not a complicated operation.
Yeah, again, I would agree with that, right? Most Russian vehicles having an autoloading system. The crews are going to have to learn how to manually load, but that's going to also add to that maintenance factor and that repair factor. So you're going to have a 4-man crew that's able to help support the maintenance on Challenger 2, which is going to be probably more than it would be on a, the Soviet-style main battle tanks such as the T-72, etc. That 4th crew member is hugely supportive of activities on the main battle tank and day-to-day activities, and I think that's actually going to benefit the Ukrainian armed forces in going into a combat scenario, having that capability of having someone else to do the labor, right? Changing tracks, running gear, etc., or even in this configuration, camouflaging the tank. With a 4-man crew, you're also given more opportunity for sentry, right? I know this sounds kind of benign, but it's true. The more people you have in a crew of a tank, the less workload you're having to do night watch, sentries, silent watch, etc., protecting your harbor area or protecting your tank position. It's very, very important to have that ability to have a crew that can take more workload away from, say, the commander, who has a lot on his plate already. And the manual loading, of course, is going to be something that needs to be done quickly and efficiency. So the driving is going to be simple. Commanding is quite complex. Gunnery is going to be fairly simplistic, and loading is going to be basically just muscle memory and getting used to actually hand loading those rounds. It is 3-part ammunition, so they're going to be quite confused potentially by that too. We've got the projectile, the cartridge, or the propellant, and then the cartridge or the primer that the magazine's then slotted into the main gun to fire. So 3-part ammunition might be a little bit new to them too, because they're used to sort of the 2-stage just plug into the barrel with the autoloader and off it goes to the Russian stuff. So we'll see how quickly they can reload the gun, but of course they're going to be selecting crews, I'm sure they're the best of the best to go onto these tanks. They're not going to be picking just some, average reservist off the street. They're going to find the best tankers they can out there that have the ability to cross-train with British crews and, other crews out there as well, including Leopard 2s and potentially Abrams as well.
The next consideration will be the logistic support. But again, it's about diesel, getting enough diesel into these tanks. But, Challenge 2 is relatively good when it...
Oh, by the way, Remy represent. So this is actually the vehicle that I operated in the British Army. I was commander of. Commander, driver, and 3rd man. So the 512 Warrior. This is the repair variant. Has the crane on the side there to allow us to lift not only its own power pack out of the Warrior, but it's, of course, other engines, vehicles engines as well, including the Challenger 2. I'd be interested to see if they send 512s with Challengers. I haven't heard anything of that yet, but again, everything that's structured and tailored for this Warrior is designed to lift equipment off the Challenger 2. For instance, the power pack lifting beam, it's specifically set to lift the Challenger 2 power pack out. The crane lifting limit, 6.5 tons, able to lift the entire power pack out of the Challenger 2. Also, the Warrior has what's called an HMT, or High Mobility Trailer, which allows them to carry a power pack from the 3rd line repair stations, 2nd line, to 1st line. So that gives the ability for the supply chain of engines or power packs that do need to be replaced be brought into the field right away, instead of trying to pull the tank back to a repair station at 2nd line, which could be miles away in the combat scenario. So I'm kind of interested to see how the logistics work on this, because again, in a normal training scenario, if the tank breaks down, you'd be all cool and calm. You'd drive the vehicle out, you'd bring a power pack with you on your HMT trailer that would be towed by the Warrior, and you'd plug it into the tank. I don't know if they exist, if they're bringing that kind of configuration. Maybe they'll just bring them on trucks and have a specific Russian-style crane that will put the engines into the back of the Challenger 2. Interesting dynamic, though, and I'm kind of curious to see what they're going to do with that.
Comes to that, and other parts are very much plug and play. If there's a problem with the engine, you whip it out and you put a new one in.
So let's just go back to that scene there, because this is a scene I'm all too used to. This is definitely my life in the British Army for sure. So again, though, right, this configuration designed to lift the Challenger 2 power pack out. Whether or not they're going to provide, a bunch of power packs as well to accompany these tanks, to just send 15, 14 tanks with no ancillary equipment, such as power packs, even power pack stands, testing equipment to be able to ground run and test the engines when they're out there. We have power pack testing facilities, or like C-cans that you can put the engine in and test for a second or third line repair. Maybe the Brits are basically going to say, whatever's broken, send it back to us, fly it back to us, and we'll fix it for you. I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see how that works. And this is really my REME brain or mechanical brain kicking in here.
The new one in. And again, I think that's well within the compass of Ukrainian mechanics to be able to pick that up pretty quickly.
And I would agree with what you just said there for sure. I think Ukrainian mechanics have a huge amount of skill and potential to repair and recover these vehicles without fault. But it really does, again, come down to that ancillary equipment that helps them to do that. Can they do it? Totally. Can they do it easily? Maybe not. And we're talking about combat scenarios right now. We're not talking about just training. It's stuff that they're going to need to have available to them to be able to change out quickly. So really, that's about it in terms of today's video, folks. I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about some information that's going out there that's kind of just interesting to hear in different articles and news stories you read. Am I glad or sad that the Challenger 2 is going to Ukraine? Well, I'm neutral. I'm totally neutral. And I guess I can't really speak to this too much because it's just not where I need to be in terms of the way in which my opinion is based on this. But Challenger 2 is going to. It's almost like sending your kids off to school, right, or out to the real world. Challenger 2 is going to go do what it was meant to always do, and that's to me an interesting dynamic that I'm curious to see what happens. The reality is though that people can die, and people more than likely will, and Challenger 2s could and more than likely will be destroyed. And this is a real trial, a real test for the Challenger 2. It's its first true. Other than Iraq, yes, they took on, the Iraq Army's T-62s and, tanks out there back in the day. But really, in comparison, now we're looking at a totally different dynamic. And I'm a little nervous, in all honesty. I know a lot of people are going to be messaging me once these tanks finally get into the combat and into the battlefield and say, do a video on this, do a video on that. And I'm clearly not going to be able to do that out of respect for the crews and respect for the conflict, but also for my own policies that I have to adhere by. But I will be paying very, very, very close attention to this Challenger 2 scenario, and although I can't make content, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and ask my opinion if you wish to directly, and I'd love to hear your comments in the comment section below. It's a long one today, it's a long video, but I appreciate you all hanging out with me today. If you did enjoy, please leave me a like and also click that little bell by the subscribe button. You can also go check out my description box below if you want to support my Patreon or PayPal, and thank you to everyone who has been supporting me financially on this channel. And of course, I still have my clothing brand sponsor that I'm sponsored by, Attire for Effect. They are an artillery-themed clothing brand. Please go check them out. The website is in the description box, and I will see you next time. All the best, folks. Bye-bye.